On a crisp autumn morning, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air inside the bustling downtown cafe. Customers, bundled in coats and scarves, lined up at the counter, eager to grab their favorite drinks before heading off to work or school. Among them was a tall man with a thin frame, sporting a red MAGA hat pulled low over his forehead. He looked unassuming, quietly scrolling on his phone as he waited for his turn. Behind the counter, Kelly, the barista, moved swiftly, her hands a blur as she steamed milk and poured shots of espresso with practiced ease. Known for her friendly demeanor and quick wit, Kelly was a favorite among regulars. But today, something was different. As her eyes landed on the man in the red cap, her smile faltered, and a flicker of discomfort crossed her face. When the man stepped up to the counter, Kelly's unease turned into a subtle defiance. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I'll have a large Americano, please." Kelly hesitated, her hand hovering over the register. The words escaped her lips before she could stop them. "I'm sorry, but we don't serve people wearing that hat here." Her tone was steady, but there was an undeniable edge to it. The man raised an eyebrow, clearly taken aback. "Excuse me," he said, his voice still composed, though a hint of surprise lingered. Kelly folded her arms, summoning every ounce of conviction she could muster. "I said, I can't serve you while you're wearing that hat. It goes against our values here." A murmur swept through the cafe as nearby customers turned their attention to the unfolding scene. Some exchanged glances, others whispered among themselves, while a few reached for their phones, eager to capture what was quickly becoming a confrontation. The man remained calm, studying Kelly for a moment before speaking again. "Are you sure about that?" he asked, his tone measured but carrying an undercurrent of something Kelly couldn't quite place. Her heart raced, but she stood her ground. "Yes, I'm sure. We have the right to refuse service, and I'm exercising that right." The man let out a quiet sigh, as if trying to decide whether to press the issue further. Finally, he reached up and removed the hat, revealing a head of slightly tousled hair. He placed the cap on the counter and looked Kelly square in the eye. "You might want to reconsider your stance," he said, his words calm but loaded with meaning. "Because I think you're making a mistake." Before Kelly could respond, another voice cut through the tension. "What's going on here?" It was the cafe manager, a middle-aged woman named Susan, who had been in the back office. Her eyes darted between Kelly and the man, her expression a mix of confusion and concern. Kelly started to explain, but the man held up a hand to stop her. "No need," he said, flashing a small, enigmatic smile. "I was just about to leave." He picked up his hat, adjusted it back on his head, and turned to walk away. As he reached the door, he paused and glanced over his shoulder. "By the way," he added casually, "you might want to check who signs your paychecks before you decide who gets served in this place." The room fell silent as his words hung in the air. Kelly's face turned pale, and Susan looked as though she'd just seen a ghost. The man opened the door, stepped outside, and disappeared into the street, leaving the cafe in stunned silence. For a moment, no one moved. Then, almost as if on cue, the whispers began. "Who was that?" "Did he just say what I think he said?" "Could he really?" Kelly, now frozen in place, tried to process what had just happened. Her mind raced through the possibilities, but one thought loomed larger than the rest. Had she just refused service to someone far more important than she could have ever imagined? As the man disappeared into the crowd outside, Kelly stood frozen behind the counter, her hands gripping the edge of the register. She could feel every pair of eyes in the cafe on her, the weight of their stares pressing down on her like a heavy blanket. Her chest tightened, and the words he had left behind echoed in her mind. "Check who signs your paychecks." Susan stepped closer, her face pale but her voice sharp. "Kelly, what just happened? Who was that man?" Kelly stammered, still trying to piece it together. He was wearing that hat, and I didn't think." She trailed off, the strength in her argument slipping away as doubt crept in. Had she overreacted? But no, she told herself, she was standing up for her principles, wasn't she? Susan pinched the bridge of her nose and took a deep breath. "Do you have any idea who that could have been?" she asked, her voice tinged with panic. He didn't exactly look like some random guy off the street. The other baristas, who had been hovering near the espresso machine, exchanged uneasy glances. One of them, a younger guy named Ryan, finally spoke up. "I thought he looked kind of familiar," he said hesitantly. "Like I've seen him somewhere before. Maybe on TV or something." Kelly shook her head, trying to push back the growing sense of dread. "No," she said firmly, though her voice wavered. "He was just another customer. He didn't even say his name." Susan wasn't convinced. "Kelly, what he said before he left." She hesitated, lowering her voice. "If he owns this place, or even if he's someone connected to it, you might have just made a huge mistake." Kelly bristled, the tension and guilt bubbling over. "I was just doing what I thought was right," she snapped. "If we're supposed to have values here, then we should stand by them, no matter who's on the other side of the counter." Susan stared at her for a long moment, then sighed. "I get that, but this isn't just about values. It's about keeping this place running, about all of our jobs." She gestured around the cafe, where customers were still murmuring and sneaking glances at Kelly. "If word gets out that you turned someone like him away, someone important, it could hurt all of us." Kelly opened her mouth to respond, but stopped when she noticed one of the regulars, an older man named Mr. Jacobs, approaching the counter. He was a retired teacher who spent his mornings at the cafe with a newspaper and a black coffee. Today, though, he looked more curious than usual. "Excuse me, miss," he said gently, his eyes twinkling with a mix of mischief and curiosity. "I couldn't help but overhear. That fellow you just turned away, did you happen to recognize him?" Kelly forced a smile. "No, Mr. Jacobs. Do you know who he is?" Mr. Jacobs chuckled softly, shaking his head. "Not exactly, but there's something about him that rings a bell. The way he carried himself, the way he spoke, it reminded me of someone I read about in the paper a while back." "What kind of someone?" Susan cut in, leaning forward. "Well," Mr. Jacobs began, stroking his chin thoughtfully, "there was an article about a certain tech billionaire. Very low-key, keeps to himself most of the time, but apparently he's been investing in small businesses across the city. I can't recall his name, but it wouldn't surprise me if he's the one you just turned away." Kelly's stomach dropped. She felt a cold sweat forming on the back of her neck. "You're saying he's a billionaire?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Could be," Mr. Jacobs said with a shrug. "Or maybe I'm just imagining things. But either way, he didn't seem like the kind of man you want to cross." Kelly forced a laugh, but it sounded hollow even to her own ears. "I think you're reading too much into it," she said, trying to dismiss the thought. But deep down, she couldn't shake the possibility. As the morning rush began to wind down, Kelly's mind was a storm of conflicting emotions. Part of her wanted to stand firm, to believe that she had done the right thing by sticking to her principles. But another part of her, one she wasn't ready to admit, was filled with doubt. What if she had misjudged the situation? What if her actions had consequences far beyond what she intended? By the time her shift ended, Kelly was exhausted, not just physically but mentally. She grabbed her coat and bag, muttering a quick goodbye to Susan and Ryan, and stepped out into the chilly afternoon air. The streets were alive with the sounds of city life, cars honking, people chatting, the distant hum of construction. But Kelly barely noticed. Her thoughts were consumed by the mysterious man in the red hat and the cryptic warning he had left behind. She decided to stop at the library on her way home. If this man was as important as everyone seemed to think, there had to be some way to figure out who he was. She found a computer in the corner and started typing in keywords. Tech billionaire, investor, red hat, owns coffee shops. The search results were a mix of articles, blog posts, and images, none of which seemed to lead anywhere. Frustrated, she leaned back in her chair, staring at the screen. Maybe she was overthinking it. Maybe he was just some guy trying to make a statement with his choice of headwear. But then, as she scrolled through the images, something caught her eye. A photo of a man standing in front of a sleek glass building, wearing a suit and a familiar red hat. The caption read, "Elon Musk attends event supporting small businesses." Kelly's heart skipped a beat. Could it really have been him? She clicked on the article and scanned the text, her eyes moving faster and faster as the pieces began to fall into place. The event had taken place just a few blocks from the cafe, and the article mentioned Musk's interest in supporting local entrepreneurs. It wasn't definitive proof, but it was enough to make her stomach churn. She closed the browser and sat there for a long moment, staring at the blank screen. If it was Elon Musk, what did that mean for her? For the cafe? For everyone who worked there? And most importantly, why hadn't he revealed himself? Why had he let her make that mistake without saying a word? As Kelly walked home, the weight of the day pressed down on her. The city lights blurred into streaks of color as her mind raced with unanswered questions. She replayed the encounter over and over, analyzing every word, every gesture, every fleeting expression. She couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Back at her small apartment, Kelly sank into the couch and stared out the window at the darkening sky. She had no idea what the next day would bring, but one thing was certain: her life at the cafe would never be the same again. The next morning, Kelly arrived at the cafe earlier than usual, her nerves already on edge. The sun had barely risen, casting a pale light over the city streets, and the cafe was still quiet, save for the soft hum of the coffee machines warming up. She thought the early start would give her a chance to settle in before the chaos of the day. But instead, she found Susan waiting for her, arms crossed and face set in a grim expression. "Kelly," Susan said without preamble, "we need to talk." Kelly dropped her bag on the counter and sighed. "About yesterday, I know. I've been thinking about it all night." Susan nodded sharply. "Good, because you're not the only one. I got a call late last night from the district manager. Apparently, someone lodged a complaint about what happened. They didn't name names, but they mentioned enough details for it to get flagged." Kelly's stomach twisted. "A complaint? About me?" "Not directly," Susan said, though her tone made it clear that Kelly was at the center of it. "But the part that concerns me is how the district manager reacted. He kept asking if we'd had any unusual customers lately. When I mentioned the man in the red hat, he got quiet. Too quiet." Kelly felt a chill run through her. What does that mean? Do they know who he is? Susan sighed, running a hand through her hair. "That's the thing, I don't know. But they told me to keep an eye on things. And if anything like that happens again, I'm supposed to report it immediately." Kelly swallowed hard, her mind racing. Was the mysterious man behind the complaint? If so, why hadn't he confronted her directly? And what did the district manager know that she didn't? As the day wore on, the cafe began to fill with its usual crowd of morning commuters and regulars. But Kelly couldn't shake the feeling that every customer walking through the door might somehow be connected to the man in the red hat. She found herself scanning their faces, looking for any sign of recognition or familiarity. Around midday, a woman in a sharp business suit approached the counter. Her demeanor was calm but commanding, and she had an air of authority that immediately set Kelly on edge. "Good afternoon," the woman said with a polite smile. "Is the manager available?" Susan, who had been restocking shelves nearby, quickly stepped forward. "I'm the manager. How can I help you?" The woman introduced herself as Claire Peterson, a representative from a local business consulting firm. She explained that her company often worked with small businesses in the area, providing support and resources to help them grow. But as she spoke, Kelly noticed something strange. Claire's gaze kept flicking toward her, as if she was being evaluated. "I was actually hoping to speak with your barista," Claire said suddenly, nodding in Kelly's direction. "May I?" Kelly froze, her heart pounding. Susan hesitated, clearly unsure of what was going on, but eventually gestured for Kelly to join them at a nearby table. Claire wasted no time. "I understand there was an incident here yesterday," she said, her tone neutral but probing. "A customer was refused service. Is that correct?" Kelly glanced at Susan, who gave her a subtle nod. Taking a deep breath, Kelly recounted the events of the previous day, trying to stay calm and professional. When she finished, Claire leaned back in her chair, her expression unreadable. "And you stand by your decision?" Claire asked, her voice carefully measured. Kelly hesitated. The weight of the question pressed down on her, but she knew she couldn't backpedal now. "Yes," she said firmly. "I believed I was doing the right thing at the time." Claire studied her for a moment, then smiled faintly. "I appreciate your honesty, but I need you to understand something. The man you refuse service to is not just any customer. He's someone with influence, someone who could significantly impact the future of this cafe." Kelly's stomach churned. "So he does own the place?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Claire didn't answer directly. Instead, she said, "Let's just say he has a vested interest in its success. And while I can't disclose any specifics, I can tell you that he's watching. How you handle yourself moving forward will determine a lot." The cryptic response only deepened Kelly's anxiety. What did watching mean? Was he planning to shut the cafe down? Or was this some kind of test? As Claire stood to leave, she handed Susan a business card. "If anything else comes up, you can reach me at this number," she said. Then turning to Kelly, she added, "And I suggest you think carefully about how you interact with customers in the future." After Claire left, Kelly felt like the walls of the cafe were closing in on her. Susan tried to reassure her, but the uncertainty was unbearable. Every sound, every movement seemed like a potential sign of what was to come. That evening, as Kelly walked home, she noticed a sleek black car parked across the street from her apartment. It wasn't a car she recognized, and as she passed by, she couldn't shake the feeling that someone inside was watching her. She quickened her pace and hurried up the stairs to her apartment, locking the door behind her. The events of the day replayed in her mind as she sat on the couch, staring at her phone. Should she try to find out more about the man in the red hat? Or would that only make things worse? Her curiosity battled with her fear, but eventually she gave in. She opened her laptop and began searching again, this time focusing on local business ownership and investment records. Hours passed as she sifted through articles and reports, piecing together a narrative that only raised more questions. It seemed that the man she had turned away, if it truly was Elon Musk, had been quietly buying up small businesses in the area, not just cafes, but bookstores, bakeries, and even a struggling art gallery. The reason behind his investments wasn't clear, but one thing was certain. He was deeply involved in the community, even if most people didn't know it. As Kelly closed her laptop, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was now part of something much larger than she had realized. The question was, what role would she play in it? And what price would she have to pay? The next few days at the cafe were unlike anything Kelly had ever experienced. Each shift was marked by an almost unbearable sense of anticipation. Every time the door opened, her heart raced. She found herself studying each new customer, wondering if today would be the day he returned, the man in the red hat. Susan, though trying to remain calm for the sake of the staff, was equally on edge. She had begun double-checking every detail of their operations, making sure the cafe ran as smoothly as possible. Even Ryan, who usually had a laid-back attitude, seemed unusually focused, throwing nervous glances at Kelly whenever they worked together. The tension in the air was palpable, and it only grew heavier with each passing day. Late one afternoon, just as the post-lunch lull began, Kelly noticed something odd. A man in a gray suit was sitting at a corner table, nursing a cup of coffee. He had been there for hours, barely touching his drink, his eyes occasionally scanning the room. It wasn't unusual for customers to linger, especially students or freelancers using the cafe's free Wi-Fi. But there was something about this man, his stiff posture, his watchful gaze, that set him apart. Susan noticed too. She leaned in close to Kelly behind the counter, whispering, "Do you think he's with him?" Kelly glanced at the man again. "I don't know. Maybe. Should we say something?" Susan shook her head quickly. "No, just act normal. If he's here for a reason, he'll make it known." But normal was the last thing Kelly felt. As the hours dragged on, she kept an eye on the man, waiting for him to make a move. Finally, as the sun began to set and the cafe grew quieter, he stood up, adjusted his tie, and approached the counter. Kelly braced herself, her hands trembling slightly as she wiped down the espresso machine. "Excuse me," the man said, his voice calm but firm. "Are you Kelly?" Her breath caught in her throat, but she nodded. "Yes, that's me." The man reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek black envelope, placing it on the counter between them. "This is for you," he said. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the cafe, disappearing into the bustling street. Susan rushed over, her eyes wide with curiosity. "What is it?" she asked, staring at the envelope. Kelly hesitated, her fingers hovering over the smooth black paper. Her name was printed on the front in elegant gold lettering, but there was no return address or logo, nothing to indicate where it had come from. Slowly, she opened it, her hands shaking as she pulled out a single sheet of heavy, cream-colored paper. The message was short, typed in crisp black font. "Asterisk, you're invited. Tomorrow evening, 7 p.m. The address is enclosed. Come alone." Asterisk. Susan read over her shoulder, her mouth falling open. What is this? Is it from him?" Kelly felt a wave of unease wash over her. The address listed was in an upscale part of the city, far from her modest apartment and the cafe. It wasn't the kind of place she usually found herself, and the idea of going there alone made her stomach churn. "I don't know," she said quietly, folding the letter and slipping it back into the envelope. "But it has to be, right? Who else would send something like this?" Susan frowned, concern etched across her face. "Kelly, you don't have to go. This feels strange. What if it's some kind of trap?" Kelly shook her head. "I don't think I have a choice. If this asterisk is asterisk from him, and he's the one behind everything that's been happening, I need to find out what he wants." The rest of the day passed in a blur, and by the time Kelly returned home that evening, her nerves were frayed. She spent hours pacing her small apartment, replaying the events of the past week in her mind. Every interaction, every cryptic remark, every lingering glance from strangers, all of it felt connected, part of some larger puzzle she couldn't yet see. The next evening, Kelly dressed in her best outfit, a simple black dress and a pair of sensible flats. She debated whether to bring her phone, her ID, or anything else that might give her a sense of security, but ultimately decided to keep things minimal. Whatever was waiting for her, she wanted to appear confident, even if she didn't feel it. The address led her to a sleek, modern building with floor-to-ceiling windows that reflected the glow of the city lights. The doorman greeted her with a polite nod, as if he had been expecting her, and directed her to the elevator. Her heart pounded as she stepped inside, watching the numbers climb higher and higher until they reached the top floor. The elevator doors opened to reveal a stunning penthouse, its walls lined with artwork and shelves of books. A soft hum of classical music filled the air, and the scent of freshly brewed coffee wafted through the space. Standing in the center of the room, his back to her, was the man in the red hat. He turned slowly, his expression calm but unreadable. This time, he wasn't wearing the hat, but there was no mistaking him. His presence was magnetic, commanding the entire room without a word. "Kelly," he said, his voice smooth and even. "Thank you for coming." She swallowed hard, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "You didn't exactly leave me much of a choice." A faint smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. "Fair enough. But I think you'll find that tonight's meeting is more of an opportunity than a confrontation." Kelly raised an eyebrow, her skepticism evident. Opportunity for what? He gestured to a chair near the large window, inviting her to sit. She hesitated for a moment before cautiously taking a seat. The man remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back as he looked out over the city's skyline. "You're probably wondering who I am," he began, "and why I've gone to such lengths to get your attention." Kelly nodded, her grip tightening on the armrests of the chair. That would be a good place to start. He turned to face her, his expression serious. "My name is Elon Musk, and whether you realize it or not, you've become a central figure in a project that's very important to me." Her breath caught in her throat, but before she could respond, he continued. "I've been investing in small businesses like the cafe where you work, not just to support them financially, but to understand the people behind them. Their values, their decisions, their willingness to stand for what they believe in. Yesterday, you made a choice, one that caught my attention." Kelly's mind raced, trying to make sense of his words. So, all of this was some kind of test. Elon smiled faintly, but his eyes remained serious. "Not a test. A lesson. For both of us." Before she could press him further, he stepped closer, his gaze piercing. "The question is, Kelly, are you ready to learn what it's all been leading to?" Kelly's pulse quickened as Elon's question lingered in the air, heavy with meaning. His words were calculated, deliberate, and yet they carried an intensity that made her feel like this was bigger than just her decision behind the counter that day. She tried to steady her voice, though her heart was pounding. "What exactly do you mean by that? What lesson am I supposed to be learning here?" Elon didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked over to a sleek coffee table where a thick, leather-bound folder sat. He picked it up and handed it to her. "Before I explain," he said, "you need to see this." Kelly hesitated before taking the folder. It felt heavy in her hands, its weight somehow symbolic of the moment. She opened it slowly, her eyes scanning the contents. At first, it seemed like a collection of documents, financial records, property deeds, investment summaries. But then she saw something that made her heart stop. It was a detailed file with her name on it. "What is this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Elon sat down across from her, his expression unreadable. "It's your profile. Every decision you've made, every value you've demonstrated, every action that speaks to who you are as a person. I've been watching, Kelly, not just you, but others like you. People who find themselves at crossroads every day and make choices that ripple outward. She stared at him, disbelief washing over her. You've been tracking me. For how long? Why? His gaze didn't waver. Months. And not just tracking you, but observing how you handle pressure, conflict, and moral dilemmas. It's part of a larger initiative I've been working on. Something that could redefine how businesses operate and how people interact with the world around them. Kelly's mind raced as she flipped through the pages of the folder. There were photos of her at work, notes on her interactions with customers, even snippets of conversations she didn't remember having. It was invasive, overwhelming, and utterly surreal. This isn't right, she said, shaking her head. You had no right to do this. Elon leaned forward, his voice low but firm. I understand how this might feel. But before you judge, consider this. The world is at a turning point. The choices we make now will shape the future for generations. I need people like you, people with integrity who aren't afraid to stand up for what they believe in. Kelly couldn't believe what she was hearing. You think watching me refuse to serve you coffee tells you I have integrity? That doesn't make sense. Elon's expression softened, but there was still a sharpness in his eyes. It's not just about that moment. It's about patterns. Consistency. When you made that decision, you weren't just reacting. You were standing by your principles, even when it wasn't convenient. That's rare. Kelly set the folder down, her hands trembling. And what if I don't want to be part of your initiative? What if I just want to live my life without being part of some grand experiment? Elon smiled faintly, though there was a hint of sadness in it. That's your choice. But you should know there's more at stake here than just you or me. Before she could respond, there was a knock at the door. Kelly's head snapped toward the sound, her tension spiking. Elon seemed unfazed, rising to answer it. As he opened the door, a woman entered, her presence commanding and her expression serious. It was Claire, the woman who had come to the cafe just days earlier. Kelly's stomach dropped. You, she said, her voice laced with disbelief. You're part of this too. Claire nodded, her sharp gaze fixed on Kelly. I am. And before you ask, no, this isn't just about you. There are others, many others, who are part of this process. But you're different, Kelly. Your role is more significant than you realize. Kelly felt like the room was spinning. Significant how? What are you talking about? Claire exchanged a glance with Elon, then stepped closer to Kelly. There's another layer to this. You weren't just chosen for your values or your decisions. You were chosen because of what you represent, an untapped potential to influence others, to lead by example. Kelly's mind was reeling. Lead? I'm just a barista. I'm not a leader. Elon stepped forward, his tone calm but resolute. You're more than that, Kelly. You've been underestimated your entire life, but you've always risen to the occasion. This isn't about your job title. It's about your ability to inspire change. Kelly shook her head, overwhelmed. I don't understand any of this. What do you expect me to do? Elon gestured to the folder. Think of this as a starting point. We're offering you a chance to be part of something transformative. But it's not just about us choosing you. You have to choose this too. The weight of his words hung in the air, and Kelly felt a mix of fear, confusion, and something else she couldn't quite name. Was it curiosity? Hope? She wasn't sure. But before she could respond, Claire's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her expression tightening. They're here, Claire said, her voice low but urgent. Elon nodded, his demeanor shifting. Kelly, whatever you decide, know this. The next few hours will determine more than you can imagine. I suggest you stay. Kelly's heart raced as she looked from Elon to Claire, trying to piece together what was happening. "Who's here?" she asked, her voice trembling. Claire didn't answer directly. Instead, she walked to the window and peered down at the street below. Let's just say they're not as interested in collaboration as we are. The room suddenly felt smaller, the tension almost suffocating. Kelly's mind was a whirlwind of questions, but one thing was clear. Whatever was happening, she was in far deeper than she had ever anticipated. Kelly's breath caught as she stared at Claire, the tension in the room thickening with every second. She could feel the weight of the unspoken words between them, the significance of whatever was happening just beyond the walls of the penthouse. "What do you mean, they're here?" "Who are they?" she asked, her voice barely steady. Elon moved swiftly, his calm demeanor masking the urgency in his actions. He crossed the room to a hidden panel on the wall, pressing a sequence of buttons. A monitor slid into view, revealing a live feed of the street below. Black SUVs had pulled up, their doors open as several figures in dark suits emerged. They moved with precision, their expressions grim, and their intentions unmistakable. "They're here to shut us down," Elon said, his voice even but tinged with an edge of defiance. "They don't understand what we're doing, or maybe they do, and that's what terrifies them." Kelly's heart pounded as she watched the scene unfold on the monitor. She turned to Elon, her voice rising with panic. "Shut us down? Why? What is this all about?" Claire answered this time, her tone sharp and direct. "They represent a group that thrives on maintaining the status quo. What we're building threatens that. If people like you, ordinary individuals, realize the power of their choices, it shifts the balance. They lose control." Kelly shook her head, the pieces of the puzzle still not fitting together. "I'm just one person. How can I threaten anyone?" Elon turned to her, his gaze steady. "It's not just about you. It's about the ripple effect. Every action, every decision you make, it sets an example for others. That's what they fear, the possibility of change spreading beyond their reach." A loud thud echoed from the entrance to the penthouse, and Kelly flinched. The sound was followed by muffled voices, orders barked with authority. Claire moved quickly, pulling Kelly toward the back of the room. "We need to get you out of here. They're not just here for us. They'll use you to dismantle everything we've built." Kelly resisted, fear and frustration bubbling over. "I still don't understand. What do they want from me? Why can't I just walk away?" Elon stepped closer, his expression unyielding. "You could walk away, Kelly. You could forget everything that's happened here, go back to your life, and let them win. Or you could stay and fight for something bigger than yourself. The choice is yours, but know this. The world is watching, even if you can't see it yet." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. She thought about the folder, the details of her life laid bare, the idea that her choices had meaning beyond the small world she occupied. It felt impossible to believe, and yet, in the pit of her stomach, she knew he was right. The door to the penthouse burst open, and several agents stormed in, their presence commanding and their movements deliberate. Claire positioned herself between Kelly and the intruders, her stance protective. Elon stood calmly, his hands raised in a gesture of compliance, but his eyes burned with defiance. "Stand down," one of the agents barked, his tone cold and unyielding. "This operation is over." "No," Elon replied, his voice firm. "It's just beginning." Before Kelly could process what was happening, Elon pressed another button on the hidden panel. The monitor flickered, and a live broadcast appeared, streaming to millions of viewers worldwide. The screen displayed Elon standing beside Kelly, his voice carrying a message of unity, empowerment, and the importance of individual choices. "This is what they're afraid of," he said, addressing the unseen audience. "That you'll realize your voice matters, that your decisions have power. They want you to believe you're insignificant, but you're not." The agents froze, their authority momentarily eclipsed by the magnitude of the broadcast. Kelly's mind raced as she realized the gravity of what was happening. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone watching, everyone who could be inspired to take a stand. The leader of the agents stepped forward, his face a mask of frustration. "Shut it down now." But before they could act, Claire moved swiftly, activating a hidden mechanism that sealed the room, giving them a few precious moments. Alon turned to Kelly, his expression softening. "This is it, Kelly. The moment where you decide who you want to be. You can leave and return to your life, or you can stay and become part of something bigger." Kelly's chest tightened as she looked around the room, at Claire's determined face, at Elon's unwavering resolve, and at the live broadcast that had captured the world's attention. For the first time, she felt the weight of her choices, the reality of what she could do if she had the courage. "I'll stay," she said, her voice steady despite the fear swirling inside her. Elon smiled, a flicker of relief crossing his face. "Then let's show them what real change looks like." As the agents worked to breach the sealed room, the broadcast continued, reaching millions more with every passing second. Kelly stood beside Elon, her heart pounding but her resolve firm. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't just a barista anymore. She was part of something far greater, and she was ready to fight for it. Just as the agents broke through the final barrier, the screen went dark, the broadcast ending with a simple message. Asterisk, the power is yours. Asterisk. The agents stormed in, but the message had already spread, leaving an indelible mark on everyone who had seen it. As they were escorted out, Kelly caught Elon's eye. He gave her a small nod, as if to say, "Asterisk, you've done enough, asterisk." And in that moment, she knew he was right. As Kelly was led out of the penthouse by the agents, her mind raced with 1,000 thoughts. The adrenaline of the moment still coursed through her veins, but the reality of what had just happened was beginning to sink in. The live broadcast was over, but its impact was only beginning to ripple across the world. Even as she was ushered into the back of a waiting car, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had stepped into something far larger than herself. The ride was silent, save for the hum of the engine. Kelly stared out the window, watching the city lights blur past. She felt the weight of Elon's words echoing in her mind. Asterisk, the power is yours, asterisk. She had stood at the edge of a decision, not knowing what lay on the other side, and now there was no going back. After what felt like hours, the car pulled up outside a nondescript building. One of the agents opened the door, gesturing for her to step out. "You're free to go," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "For now." Kelly hesitated, her legs trembling as she stepped onto the sidewalk. She turned to face the agent, confusion etched on her face. "What happens next?" The man's expression remained unreadable. "That's up to you." Before she could respond, the car sped off, leaving her standing alone in the quiet street. The night air was cool against her skin, and for the first time in hours, she felt the stillness of the world around her. She looked up at the stars, their faint light piercing through the darkness. In that moment, she felt small, yet strangely significant. Over the next few days, the fallout from the broadcast was impossible to ignore. The video had gone viral, sparking debates, discussions, and movements across the globe. People from all walks of life were sharing their stories, inspired by the simple but powerful message. Asterisk, every choice matters asterisk Kelly's face was now recognizable to millions, though she had never sought the spotlight. She saw her name trending online, accompanied by headlines like asterisk Barista stands up for change asterisk and asterisk the face of a new movement. Asterisk. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from reporters, friends, and even strangers who claimed she had inspired them. But amidst the noise, she kept to herself, processing everything that had happened. She thought about Elon, his vision for a better world, and the risks he had taken to make it a reality. She thought about Claire, whose loyalty and strength had been unwavering. And she thought about herself, about the moment she had chosen to stay, and what that decision now meant. One afternoon, as she sat in her small apartment scrolling through the news, there was a knock at the door. Her heart leaped, half expecting it to be agents or someone connected to the events of that night. But when she opened the door, it was Claire. Dressed casually, but with the same sharp focus in her eyes, Claire stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. "We need to talk," Claire said, her tone brisk but not unkind. Kelly nodded, motioning for her to sit. "I didn't think I'd see you again." Claire offered a faint smile. "I don't leave loose ends, and you're far from one. You've become the face of something bigger than either of us, Kelly. Whether you wanted it or not, people are looking to you for guidance." Kelly exhaled slowly, the weight of those words settling on her shoulders. "I don't know what to do. I never asked for this. I just wanted to stand up for what I believed in." "And that's exactly why they're listening," Claire said firmly. "You represent something real. You weren't trained for this. You didn't plan it. You're just someone who made a choice in a moment that mattered. People see themselves in you." Kelly frowned, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "So what now? Am I supposed to lead some kind of movement? I don't even know where to start." Claire leaned forward, her expression softening. "You don't have to have all the answers, Kelly. Just keep being who you are. Speak your truth, and let the rest unfold naturally. And if you ever feel lost, remember you're not alone. There are people, like me, like Elon, who believe in you." Kelly felt a flicker of hope at Claire's words, but there was still uncertainty in her heart. And what about him? Elon, what happens to everything he's been working for? Claire's smile widened slightly, a hint of pride in her eyes. "He's not going anywhere. He's seen this kind of resistance before, and he's not one to back down. But right now, his focus is on making sure the seeds we've planted take root. That starts with people like you." As the days turned into weeks, Kelly began to find her footing. She started small, sharing her story in interviews and on social media, not as an expert or leader, but as someone who had made a choice and learned from it. She spoke about the importance of standing by one's values, even in the face of opposition. Her words resonated with people, not because they were perfect, but because they were genuine. She returned to the cafe, where her coworkers greeted her with a mix of awe and affection. The place felt different now, as if the air itself carried a sense of purpose. Customers came in not just for coffee, but to connect, to share their own stories of small but meaningful choices. The cafe became a hub of conversation and community, a reflection of the change Kelly had unwittingly sparked. One evening, as she closed up shop, she found a note tucked under the cash register. It was handwritten, the letters bold and familiar. Asterisk, every revolution starts with one brave voice. Keep speaking, and the world will listen. Asterisk, it wasn't signed, but Kelly didn't need a name to know who it was from. As she locked the doors and stepped out into the cool night air, Kelly felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in weeks. She looked up at the stars, the same ones she had seen on that night of chaos and uncertainty. But this time, they didn't make her feel small. They made her feel connected to something infinite. Kelly walked home with a newfound clarity. She didn't have to have all the answers, and she didn't have to be perfect. All she had to do was keep making choices that mattered, one step at a time. And as she did, she knew she wasn't walking alone.